The war between Iran and Israel is no longer just another conflict in the Middle East. What is happening right now has the potential to reshape global politics in ways that could affect the entire world. Behind the scenes, two of the most powerful countries on the planet are watching every development very carefully: China and Russia. Neither country has entered the war directly, but both are paying extremely close attention to what happens next. Because the outcome of this conflict could influence global power, international alliances, energy markets, and the balance between the world's biggest superpowers. To understand why this war matters so much to China and Russia, we first need to understand the importance of the region where this conflict is unfolding. The Middle East has always been one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. It sits at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, making it one of the most important global trade and energy hubs. A large percentage of the world's oil and gas supply comes from this region, and much of that energy passes through critical shipping routes that connect the Middle East to the rest of the world. Because of this, conflicts in the region rarely stay local. They often have ripple effects across global markets, international politics, and even military strategy. The ongoing tensions between Iran and Israel have already resulted in missile strikes, military mobilizations, and growing fears that the conflict could expand beyond the borders of the two countries. Analysts around the world are concerned that if the fighting escalates further, it could pull other regional powers into the conflict. If that happens, the situation could quickly evolve into a much larger regional crisis. And whenever the Middle East becomes unstable, the consequences are felt globally. Oil prices rise, markets react, and global leaders begin calculating how the situation might affect their own strategic interests. For Russia, the Middle East has long been a key part of its geopolitical strategy. Over the last decade, Moscow has worked aggressively to increase its influence across the region. Russia has built strong relationships with several Middle Eastern governments, including Iran, and has positioned itself as a major political and military player in regional affairs. Cooperation between Russia and Iran includes security coordination, economic partnerships, and shared geopolitical goals. One of those goals is limiting the influence of the United States in the Middle East. From Russia's perspective, the Iran-Israel conflict presents both risks and opportunities. A large regional war could destabilize partners and create unpredictable outcomes. But it could also weaken Western influence in the region. If the United States becomes deeply involved in another Middle Eastern conflict, it could stretch American diplomatic attention, military resources, and political focus. This could create strategic openings for Russia and other parts of the world. When global powers are forced to divide their attention between multiple crises, it often creates space for rivals to expand their own influence. While Russia is focused on the strategic and military implications of the conflict, China is looking at the situation from a different perspective. For Beijing, the Middle East is essential to economic stability and long-term growth. China is the world's largest importer of oil, and a significant portion of that oil comes directly from the Middle East. Any major disruption in the region could have serious consequences for global energy supplies, which in turn could impact China's economy. One of the most important locations in this equation is the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway sits between the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, and serves as one of the most critical oil transit routes in the world. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through this small but extremely important shipping corridor. If tensions in the region escalate, and shipping through this route becomes unsafe or disrupted, global oil prices could surge dramatically. For China, which relies heavily on imported energy, such a scenario could create major economic challenges. At the same time, China is also thinking about the broader geopolitical picture. Beijing has spent years building economic partnerships across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe through massive infrastructure and investment programs like the Belt and Road Initiative. These projects aim to strengthen trade routes, expand economic influence, and connect large parts of the world through Chinese-backed development. Stability in key regions like the Middle East is extremely important for the success of these long-term strategies. However, global crises sometimes create unexpected opportunities. If Western countries become heavily focused on military conflicts or regional security challenges, China may find new openings to expand its economic influence in other areas of the world. By positioning itself as a diplomatic partner and economic investor, China has often sought to present itself as a stabilizing force during times of geopolitical tension. What makes the Iran-Israel conflict particularly significant is that it sits at the intersection of a much larger global power competition. The international system today is shaped by three major players: the United States, China, and Russia. Each of these powers has different strategic priorities and long-term goals. The United States seeks to maintain global stability and protect its alliances across multiple regions. Russia aims to expand its strategic influence while challenging Western dominance in international politics. China is focused on economic expansion, technological leadership, and increasing its role in global governance. The Middle East has become one of the regions where these competing ambitions often overlap. Every diplomatic decision, military action, or political shift in the region can influence the broader balance of power between these global players. That is why conflicts in the Middle East often attract intense attention from major powers around the world. One of the biggest concerns surrounding the current situation is the risk of escalation. The Middle East is filled with complex alliances, rivalries, and proxy groups that operate across national borders. A conflict between two major regional powers can sometimes trigger reactions from other actors who feel pressured to support one side or the other. If additional countries become involved, the situation could expand rapidly and become much harder to control. Energy infrastructure, shipping lanes, and strategic military positions could become targets in a wider conflict. Global markets would likely react with extreme volatility, and governments around the world would be forced to reconsider their security and economic strategies. In such a scenario, the role of major powers like China and Russia could become even more significant. For now, both countries appear to be carefully observing the situation rather than directly intervening. But history shows that geopolitical crises rarely remain static. As events unfold, the decisions made by world leaders could dramatically change the course of the conflict and its global consequences. The war between Iran and Israel is not just about two countries fighting over regional disputes. It is about the future direction of international politics and the balance of power between the world's most influential nations. Russia sees strategic opportunities that could shift global dynamics. China sees economic risks, but also potential geopolitical openings. And the rest of the world is watching closely, aware that what happens in this region could have far-reaching consequences. Whether this conflict remains contained or evolves into something much larger will depend on the choices made by governments, alliances, and global powers in the coming months. But one thing is certain: the events unfolding today are part of a much bigger story. A story about power, influence, and the future of the global order.